If it's Wednesday, former Congressman Matt Gaetz back on the Hill today, trying to win enough support to be the next Attorney General as the House Ethics Committee meets to decide whether to release a potentially damning report on his conduct. Plus, Republican Senator Kevin Cramer meets the press after spending the day with President-elect Trump and warning publicly that Matt Gaetz has a steep hill to climb to win his support for confirmation. And Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin sits down exclusively with NBC News for his first one-on-one interview since the election, responding to Trump's pick to run the Pentagon, saying women should not serve in combat roles. Welcome to Meet the Press. I'm Yami Shelsendor in Washington. Right now, there is a full court press underway on Capitol Hill to mobilize support for President-elect Donald Trump's most polarizing cabinet picks. And this afternoon, the House Ethics Committee met to debate whether to release a potentially damning report on one of those picks, former Congressman Matt Gaetz. Moments ago, the Republican chair of the committee, Congressman Michael Gaetz, left that meeting swarmed by reporters, telling them there's been no agreement on releasing the report. He would provide no other details about the discussions. But on his way into the meeting, Congressman Gaetz suggested the committee has multiple paths to choose from.
To me, the issue, there are two separate issues. One is a public release of everything that we have at this point. Another would be some sort of transmittal to the Senate Judiciary Committee once the nomination becomes official.
That comes even as some Republican senators dismiss the importance of the report itself.
I mean, we're going to see that information most likely come up. So let's dispense with the idea that suddenly just shuts it off. It's got to be dealt with. It's got to be reverse engineered. It's got to be before the committee. That's the way it works.
You're going to see this no matter what.
But I think that Speaker Johnson is right. I think you can make an argument that would be politicizing the process. I don't have any problem. In fact, I want the ethics committees in the House and the Senate to actually maintain some integrity. They have a lot of it.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, Senate Democrats disagree. Today, Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee sent a letter to FBI Director Christopher Wray requesting evidence from the closed Department of Justice investigation into Matt Gaetz on alleged sex trafficking. Gaetz has denied the allegations in all of the investigations into him. This comes as Vice President-elect J.D. Vance is on Capitol Hill meeting with Senate Republicans with Matt Gaetz. Privately, more than half of Republican senators are saying they don't see a path for Gaetz to get confirmed. But publicly, no senator has explicitly said they would vote against confirming Matt Gaetz. Today, the top Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Lindsey Graham, said Gaetz deserves to go through the process.
Here's what I told him. No rubber stamps and no lynch mob. I think Matt is a very, very smart guy. And these allegations will be dealt with in committee, but he deserves a chance to confront his accusers, and the process is turning into a lynch mob, and I'm not going to be part of that.
Of course, Gaetz is just one of several polarizing choices for Trump's new administration. Tomorrow, Vice President-elect J.D. Vance is set to return to Capitol Hill for meetings on Pete Hegseth, Trump's choice to run the Pentagon. Now, Hegseth is facing new scrutiny after his lawyer confirmed that his client paid a woman who accused him of sexual assault. Allegations Hegseth denies. Meanwhile, the president-elect is pressing ahead with other administration picks. He has tapped transition team co-chair Linda McMahon to head the Department of Education. It's an agency that Trump on the campaign trail vowed to dismantle when he took office. Trump has also chosen Matt Whitaker as ambassador to NATO. That's another organization frequently criticized by Trump during his first term and while he was running this election cycle. Both McMahon and Whitaker have little relevant experience for their respective cabinet roles. And joining me now from Capitol Hill's NBC News is Ryan Nobles. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is covering the Trump transition from West Palm Beach, Florida. And with me on set, it's NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. So thank you all for being here. Ryan, is the House Ethics Committee meeting over? Do we know also about the report, what the committee is saying, and what actually maybe even is done at this point?
Yeah, so there's a lot we don't No, Yamiche. We know that at this point they are not going to release the report publicly. Michael Gaetz, the chairman of that committee, saying as he was leaving that there was no agreement to do so. But then he did say that there could perhaps be some avenue for the House Ethics Committee to share some of their findings with the Senate Judiciary Committee, who's handling the confirmation process of Matt Gaetz, but did not get into the specificity around that. What we're waiting to see is how Democrats on this Ethics Committee responded to this back and forth. And we are expecting the ranking member of the Ethics Committee, Susan Wild, to speak here in the next few minutes. We're monitoring that. That could happen at any moment. And see if, for instance, that the Democrats on the panel very much wanted to see that report be released publicly, but it was Republicans that rebuked them. Now, that's important, because if all of the House Democrats said yes, they wanted the report to be revealed, and it's not coming out, that would mean that every single Republican said that they wanted to keep it under wraps, because that is a committee that is made up of equal parts of 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. So as you heard from the Senate Republicans that are going to be tasked with this confirmation process, they believe that they'll get this information in some form or fashion, even if it's not the House Ethics Committee report specifically, whether it's to an FBI background check, whether it's to their own investigation. But right now, it appears that House Ethics Committee, at least for now, is not going to see the light of day, Yamiche.
Well, it's interesting, as you're talking about sort of whether or not this report is ever going to see the light of day. There are Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee, as we said, sending this letter to the FBI. So how much do we know about how ready and willing Democrats are to have this fight over Matt Gaetz?
So I think the Democrats want to get all the information out there, but they also are being very careful not to turn Matt Gaetz into some sort of MAGA martyr who will then get this support rallied around him because it appears that Democrats are out to get him. They've seen this playbook used before by Republicans, the best example being during the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation, which is interesting, that sound you played earlier from Lindsey Graham, where he described the lynch mob mentality. That's what he used to describe the Brett Kavanaugh situation, and he became one of Brett Kavanaugh's biggest defenders here on Capitol Hill. They want Republicans to own this confirmation, and I believe we have a development with Susan Wild right now. Yamiche, I'll send it back to you.
Okay, let's listen to Susan Wild.
To my attention that, in fact, we had agreed that we were not going to discuss what had transpired at the meeting, but it has come to my attention that the chairman has since betrayed the process by disclosing our deliberations within moments after walking out of the committee. And he has implied that there was an agreement of the committee not to disclose the report. That is an untrue, to the extent that that suggests that the committee was in agreement or that we had a consensus on that, that is inaccurate. And I will say that a vote was taken. As many of you know, this committee is evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans, 5 Dems, 5 Republicans, which means that in order to affirmatively move something forward, somebody has to cross party lines and vote with the other side, which happens a lot, by the way, and we often vote unanimously. That did not happen in today's vote, and I do not want the American public or anyone else to think that Mr. Guest's characterization of what transpired today would be some sort of indication that the committee had unanimity or consensus on this issue, not to release the report. That would be an inaccurate portrayal, and nobody should take that from what they have heard so far. There was no consensus on this issue. We did agree that we would reconvene as a committee on December 5th to further consider this matter. And this statement that I have just made is on behalf of all of the Democratic members of the Ethics Committee. Thank you very much.
Did all the Democrats vote yes? Did all the Democrats vote to?
So that was Representative Susan Wild talking about the House Ethics Committee. Ryan, I want to come back to you. I'm a little concerned about whether or not what she was saying was accurate, because it sounded like the committee chairman was saying that there hadn't been a decision. She's saying that maybe he violated some sort of agreement there, and then was suggesting that there actually was an agreement not to release it. What do you know?
So First of all, the first point she is making was that the committee had made an agreement that when they left the room, they weren't going to talk at all about their deliberations. That was the first part that she felt that Chairman Gaetz violated, because Chairman Gaetz did talk to reporters as he was leaving. And I think the particular part of what Gaetz said that she's making abundantly clear and making sure that people don't interpret incorrectly was that Gaetz said that there was no agreement as it relates to releasing the report. And she did not want to give the impression that there was a unanimous vote not to release the report. Now, Gaetz is not incorrect in saying that there was no agreement to release the report, because if you read between the lines here, it seems pretty clear, especially what she said given at the top of her remarks about the fact that there are equal parts Republican and Democrat. It sounds like there were 5 Republican votes not to release the report, 5 Democratic votes to release the report. Therefore, there was no agreement to release the report. So both of them are correct in their interpretation of this. What I think Wild is making very clear here is that this was not unanimous agreement to keep the reports under wraps. And I think the other point that is important, which Gaetz also alluded to, was that there would be a continuing conversation about how to handle this material, and that they would meet again after Thanksgiving on December 5th.
That's right. The committee chairman said we have regularly scheduled meetings between now and the end of the year. So this continues on. Thank you so much, Ryan Nobles from Capitol Hill. And Vaughn, I want to now bring you in. Take us inside this push to get Matt Gaetz confirmed as Attorney General, especially today while he's on Capitol Hill with J.D. Vance. How much more do we know about the sort of fight mode or maybe celebratory mode that the Trump transition team is in?
Right. Well, this is multi-pronged. Number one, the vice president-to-be, J.D. Vance, walking alongside up on Capitol Hill, shepherding him around to Senate offices to try to get him to those 51 votes. But then you also have Donald Trump, who has made phone calls directly from his Mar-a-Lago estate. We also had Donald Trump yesterday travel to Texas for the Elon Musk SpaceX launch, joined by Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Bill Hagerty. So for the Trump operation here, this was a decision made to put Matt Gaetz forward, one in which they knew all too well that there would be controversy and difficulty in getting to the 51 votes. Stephen Miller, who is a close Donald Trump aide, deputy chief of staff to be inside of this next White House, was on Fox with Sean Hannity last night and was asked whether Donald Trump would seek recess appointments in the scenario that there's a holdup among senators in confirming any of his nominees. And he directly answered, yes, of course, this is going to call into question the constitutional grounds which Donald Trump could try to adjourn the Congress come January of 2025. But I think if you look at Donald Trump's social media post just from a bit ago this afternoon, I think it's very representative of where Donald Trump mindset is when it comes to Matt Gaetz and Pete Hegseth and others like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. If you take a look at this social media post from Donald Trump, writing, quote, "This is what the radical left lunatics do to people. They dirty them up, they destroy them, and then they spit them out. They are trying that right now with some great American patriots who are only trying to fix the mess. What the Democrats have made of our country, we will win MAGA."
It's interesting that you point that out. I wonder if you could, in some ways, talk about the mindset of Trump a little bit more, especially when it comes to whether or not he's worried at all that Matt Gaetz might not be confirmed, because we are hearing, at least privately from some Senate Republicans, that they don't see this path forward.
Right. It's a good question, Yamiche, but I think that the body of evidence of Donald Trump and his history is, I think, the most representative of his fight and ultimately you win mentality, and that especially coming off of not only a defamation case, but one in which he was found to have sexually abused E. Jean Carroll, Donald Trump didn't back down, didn't stop denying the underlying facts and evidence and claims made by E. Jean Carroll and individuals close to her in his own case in 2023 and 2024. Instead, he largely even campaigned on it and made the case that he was being unfairly attacked. And so we have seen here with Matt Gaetz him continue to stand by his side. But this goes back to 2017. We saw him do this with Roy Moore, who was credibly accused by multiple women of sexual misconduct towards teenagers years ago. We saw him do it with Charles Herbster, who is a Nebraska gubernatorial candidate in 2022, who had 7 women come forward with allegations of sexual misconduct against him. He went and campaigned for him in 2022. So for Donald Trump, this is another chapter of perhaps would be uncomfortable defense for most people, but for Donald Trump, he has not seemed to have any any idea of stepping away from individuals like this.
Yeah, and he's, of course, been pushing back against his own allegations and people saying that he's done things that were untoward. So thank you so much, Von Hilliard from West Palm Beach. Chuck, of course, you talked about this in your column, the political capital that President-elect Trump is using up, or maybe using up, when it comes to Matt Gaetz and Pete Hegseth. What do you make of that? Does he have enough capital, political capital, to pull this through? Is it worth it in his mind?
Look, in his mind, I think he thinks he's invincible. Right, look what he has been able to get away with, right, throughout his entire political career. If you look at the last 10 years, it's his political career. If he has said, I'm untouchable, I'm invincible, and he has that feeling, I don't think we should sit here. I mean, he now is representative of what he said famously 9 years ago. I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and my approval rating wouldn't go down. So with certain parts of the base, I think he does feel that invincible. The problem is the reality of how politics works. And he's going to expend, when you have, he's acting like he has a mandate. He won an election, but he didn't get a mandate. In fact, there are a lot of Democratic senators that got reelected in states that Donald Trump carried, which to me is like in direct contrast of a mandate. It's almost as, you can interpret that as the voters are saying, we want you there, but we don't trust your entire party. Yeah. Right? You can interpret that any way you want. Now, the irony is that the reason these Democratic senators are returning is his own voters showed up, voted for him, and left. Yeah. Because they don't care about the Republican Party. They cared about Trump. But Trump's going to expend all this capital browbeating these guys. Right now, they have no choice but to support him on these controversial picks. Most of them. I think one of them goes away. Probably Hegseth, because I think Gaetz he sees as sort of family, and he's going to fight. Hey, now, Gaetz may not get confirmed. I don't think Hegseth even makes it that far. I think he's one, because I just don't think there's the same personal connection. But he's going to burn up all this political capital. And then, Yamiche, he's about to go do what Joe Biden did for a year and a half. Negotiate one big fat bill with his own party with incredibly narrow majorities, particularly in the House. Yeah. Oh, by the way, he's got to make sure government's funded in mid-March. He is the first president that was able to successfully shut down the government while his own party controlled both the House and the Senate. So you can't rule anything out here. So he's got all these favors early on he's calling in. And you and I both know, eventually the public wears down. Yeah. And how is he? So he's using up capital now before he's ever taken the oath? Look, it's not the way to have a successful presidency and a successful agenda. It is a way if he just wants to seek revenge and burn the place down. Yeah. Well, I want to read part of your column because I think it's so important to sort of talk about this. You say, here's the political problem for Trump that he's creating for himself. He's taking full ownership of the entire bureaucracy now. At this time, he has to deliver, and his ability to deliver depends on whether he can put together a stable set of political actors to not only do his bidding, but also somehow deliver on his promises to a whole new group of voters who are trying out Trumpism for the very first time. So if you think about that, if voters picked someone to sort of be a chaos and change candidate, does it matter sort of if he's focused on all of these things? But Yamiche, what I think we get wrong, and it's the same mistake the Biden folks made, is that they think the person who was a 51-49 voter and the person that was a 90-10 voter, meaning there was no way, of course they're voting for that party, that's what they always do, versus the one that's like, I don't know, but I'll try this out. Donald Trump won because of the margin of the I don't know, I'm going to try this out. I certainly didn't like what the Biden and Harris folks. So I do think there's a core part of his base that wants to burn it down. They want to get rid of the deep state. They want whatever that means. And it's sort of an imagined mythical thing, but everybody has their own definition of it. And they want to create a new bureaucracy that they control, right? I don't think the end of the day, the American people are always been a little libertarian, meaning when one party thinks, they doesn't want any party telling them how to live their lives, doesn't want any party telling them these things. So I question whether this is going to have staying power, just because nobody is immune from political sort of what you would call it, sort of I'm losing this word here, but essentially gravity, political gravity. Thank you, Melissa Frankel, in my ear. And no one's immune to it, neither Donald Trump. The first term, he could excuse his inability to get anything done, and he really didn't do anything other than a tax cut and warp speed. He could say, oh, it was Mitch McConnell's fault, or it was Fauci's fault, or it was all these other people that I didn't really want. This time, everybody's his. Yeah. So when the government messes up, he can't blame somebody else. Democrats don't control the House. The Republicans do, by 2 votes. And that's now his burden. I don't think he fully appreciates that now every mistake government makes, there's no deep state to blame.
Yeah.
He is the deep state. Bobby Kennedy's the deep state. Tulsi Gabbard's the deep state. They control it now.
I wanted to talk to you more about this because I also have the question of what are the consequences, because he's going to be a lame duck, but I have to go because we are, of course, having to move on.
I know, I talked too much. Took too long coming up with gravity.
Well, thank you so much, Chuck Todd. And coming up, I'll talk to one of the Republican lawmakers who has been critical of Matt Gaetz. He did a phone call and a trip, though, to SpaceX launch with President-elect Trump. Did that change his mind? North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer is standing by. He joins me next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, the Trump transition team is making a concerted effort to get his cabinet picks across the finish line. The president-elect has been working the phones, according to sources familiar with the push. And yesterday in Texas, Trump was also with some Senate Republicans to watch the SpaceX test launch. Among them was Republican Senator from North Dakota, Kevin Cramer, who joins me now. So thank you so much, Senator, for being here. So you've talked to President-elect Trump about his desire to see Matt Gaetz confirmed as Attorney General. And you were also with Trump in Texas just yesterday. So what can you tell us about your conversations with the President-elect?
Well, first of all, we've been together for many hours the last, obviously yesterday and then over the weekend talked quite a while. And the issue of Matt Gaetz was not the prominent issue of the day, and it wasn't even a long discussion other than him just expressing his desire to see Matt confirmed, and he really hopes that that's what happens. But I have to say I didn't feel like there was a full court press of any type. He doesn't need to reiterate to me how important this is to him. I mean, it's after all, he is carrying out what he promised the people he would do.
And I know you said Matt Gaetz wasn't a big topic, but you have said yourself that Matt Gaetz, quote, destroyed the House of Representatives for several months, and that Gaetz has a, quote, steep hill to climb to get your vote. You also questioned whether it's worth Trump's political capital to get Matt Gaetz confirmed. So did you share those concerns with the president-elect? And if so, what was his response?
I have, and I get the sense right now he's going through a normal process where he's doing some personal lobbying. Obviously, J.D. Vance is helping him. Matt himself is reaching out. I mean, he called me and left a voicemail. I called him back. We haven't been able to connect yet. He's going through the normal channels and not spending so much capital as just spending some time on the effort. And I think it's really clear, and it's an important distinction, that he does want Matt Gaetz confirmed. This isn't a diversion of some sort or distraction from other controversial picks, because I don't think they're all that controversial. But he clearly knows what he wants, and he's put that forward. And I don't think he feels yet like he's spending a lot of capital.
And I have to ask you, I know you say that the president-elect isn't feeling like he's spending a lot of capital, but I wonder if you yourself determine that Matt Gaetz is unqualified to be Attorney General, do you think yourself that you are willing to go toe-to-toe with President-elect Trump on this issue and maybe even other Senate Republicans?
Well, it's an important part of the process. When the president's party is the majority party in the Senate and they're going to have the final say on this confirmation, obviously part of the path involves personal conversations, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's entirely to be expected. I don't expect there will be a big public brawl of any type. I actually think that he's going to measure and weigh every decision he has to make from now until we begin this process of confirming. And frankly, yesterday, most of the time, we discussed prospective cabinet secretaries. I mean, he had some announcements yesterday and some teases yesterday. Dr. Oz, of course, we talked about that. We talked about the possibility of a new FBI director.
But, Senator, I just want to ask, for you specifically, if you determine that Matt Gaetz isn't qualified, would you vote against Matt Gaetz if Donald Trump, President-elect Trump, was saying, I think that you shouldn't do that? Would you be willing to do that? So my
vote, my vote is my vote. And I think back to when I voted to override his veto of a National Defense Authorization Act, and we prevailed. Senators don't give up their votes easily. At the very least, there's transactions that take place. That's entirely appropriate. So I'm not going to say what I'll never do, nor am I going to say what I'll definitely do in this case, because there's a process, and the process involves background checks, and it may involve release of the House Ethics Committee, or it may not. I don't know, but there'll certainly be background checks, testimony, a hearing in the Judiciary Committee. that I'm not a member of, and after that, then we'll go to the next level and we'll see what happens.
Well, you bring up the House Ethics Committee. It is meeting today, or did meet today. You said the committee should release its report on Matt Gaetz. Speaker Johnson disagrees. So what should the Senate do if the committee keeps this private? And how hard is the Senate willing to fight to see this report? And specifically, how hard are maybe you willing to fight to see this report?
Sure. Well, I'm not worried about seeing the report. I think the easy thing to do and the appropriate thing to do would be for them to release it at least to start with the Judiciary Committee, who has the opportunity to review it. But if they don't release it, then I think it'll be repeated. I mean, the Judiciary Committee has a lot of power itself and has investigators and has subpoena power. They'll have hearings, they can have witnesses. All of the same things that created the House Ethics Report can be recreated. And so I think that's likely, at least to some degree. And I don't think anybody's just going to cast a vote without looking into the background. These are serious allegations. None of them have, by the way, have gotten him convicted. In fact, the FBI just stopped their investigation altogether. So it's not like he's been convicted of anything. Nobody should be surprised that Matt Gaetz is a maverick, that he is the strong, that he has, some people might even say reckless at times. But that is what Donald Trump wanted, and what he wants is what he campaigned on. He's fulfilling that promise. As per my vote, that will be determined later, once we've gone through the committee process. And we owe it to Matt, we owe it to the president, we owe it to the American people to have that process play out.
I want to also ask you about Big Hegseth. You're on the Senate Armed Services Committee, where Big Hegseth will appear before his confirmation. He said that women should not have combat roles in the military. As you know, the military roles opened all combat roles to women in 2016, and they found success, including the thousands of women who saw combat in Iraq and Afghanistan and earned Valor Awards. Are you comfortable with that position by Pete Hegseth?
Well, first of all, if that's his position, that's his personal position. He certainly earned the right to have it, at being an American, and even more so being an American warrior as he's been. So I don't find that as controversial as some people may. That may not be the military's position, even if Pete Hegseth is confirmed as the secretary. I at this point see no reason why he wouldn't be. He is a warrior's warrior. I think he will represent the enlisted man and woman, and certainly he'll have something to say about the people that are around him. But he's a great face, frankly, for a modern American military. He oozes peace through strength, and that's exactly what Donald Trump wants. And I don't, at this point, I see no reason not to support Pete Hegseth, and I intend to do everything I can to help him get across the finish line.
And I know you said that you're willing to do what it takes to get across the finish line. A U.S. military official, though, told NBC News that Hegseth showed, quote, zero leadership capability during his service with the D.C. National Guard, and that he, quote, had his own agenda. He didn't care what the rules were. So are you comfortable with someone like that leading our men and women in uniform?
Well, first of all, one military official from the D.C. National Guard is not who I turn to for my counsel. I will look forward to visiting with Pete. I know him a little bit. We're going to have a meeting. I look forward to discussing things with him, things that I agree with, things I disagree with that he has said, particularly about generals and forming a commission and all of those things to root out the woke generals. I think what we need is somebody who elevates the military and elevates service and elevates the aspirations of young officers who would like to someday be a general. And I think, for the most part, generals salute to the political leadership. I remember not so long ago when Gina Ortiz was the Undersecretary of the Air Force. She drove a lot of Air Force generals out of the service because they wouldn't be woke, because they wouldn't read her DEI report out loud. So all of these are issues that matter, but collectively you have to come up with eventually a binary decision of a yes or no. And at this point, everything I see about Pete Hegseth is that he'd be a very fine Secretary of Defense.
Yeah, well, I hear that clearly from you, Senator. Well, thank you so much, Senator Kevin Cramer, for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And up next, NBC News' exclusive interview with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, his response to Russia's new nuclear doctrine and the president-elect's pick to run the Pentagon. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Meet the Press Now. welcome back. Just days after Ukraine began using U.S.-supplied long-range weapons against Russia, the U.S. announced that its embassy in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv closed after receiving, quote, specific information of a potential significant air attack. This also comes after President Biden approved anti-personnel landmines for Ukraine to allow Kyiv to defend itself from advancing Russian troops. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin defended the U.S. policy changes in an exclusive and wide-ranging interview with NBC News' Courtney Kube. He also discussed, among other topics, his potential successor, Pete Hegseth, the president-elect's pick to lead the Pentagon. Courtney has more.
Today, the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv closing its doors and issuing a warning to employees and Americans to shelter in place amidst the threat of an imminent, large-scale attack by air on the capital city. Now, this comes as tensions are already high in the area after Russian President Vladimir Putin said that he was lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons by Russia. We spoke with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin today in an exclusive interview where I asked him about that threat from Russian President Vladimir Putin to use a nuclear weapon. But Putin has also escalated, just announcing that he's lowered the threshold for using nuclear weapons. He announced this right after press reports that the U.S. had authorized ATACMS strikes inside of Russia. Is there a reason to believe that Vladimir Putin may use a nuclear weapon?
We've known for several weeks that they were revamping their policy on use of nuclear weapons. As I look at what they're doing, and we watch their strategic forces, very carefully, I don't see a change in their strategic force posture, and so we'll continue to remain vigilant in this regard. But at this point, no, I don't see an indication that there's an imminent intent to use nuclear weapons.
Is he bluffing with this change?
He has rattled his nuclear saber quite a bit, and this is dangerous behavior, as you heard me say before. We would expect that countries with nuclear capability be a heck of a lot more responsible in terms of how they act and what they're saying. So.
Putin's nuclear saber rattling comes after the Biden administration made two big policy changes with respect to Ukraine, announcing that they will now send anti-personnel landmines to Ukraine for use against Russia, and that the Biden administration has lifted restrictions that now will allow Ukraine to use long-range ATACMS, or long-range missiles, to strike inside of Russia. Two big policy changes that Ukraine has been asking for some time. Now, our interview today with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is the first one he's done since the election and since President-elect Donald Trump announced Pete Hegseth, a Fox News media personality, as his choice to be the next Pentagon chief. Hegseth has made some comments about policy changes he thinks need to be made at the Pentagon, some of which have gotten a lot of attention. I asked Secretary Austin about some of those policy decisions. Do you have any concerns about women in these combat roles, like the ones that you mentioned when you were serving in Iraq? Do you have any concern that women impact readiness of these units?
They do impact readiness. They make us better. They make us stronger. And again, what I've seen from our women is quite incredible. And I'm not. This is not hyperbole. This is fact. I'm just telling you what I've seen. And I think, as the years have gone by, our women get better and stronger.
I also asked Secretary Austin about Pete Hegseth's recent comments that Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General C.Q. Brown, should be fired for his support of diversity initiatives. Secretary Austin fiercely defended General Brown, saying he's one of the best officers he's ever served with. And he said that the United States military needs to reflect the population as a whole, and diversity will always be one of the strengths in the U.S. military. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Courtney, for that reporting. And tune in tonight to Nightly News to catch even more of Courtney's exclusive one-on-one interview with Secretary Austin. And still to come, Speaker Johnson's ever-shrinking majority and what it means for how he'll run the U.S. House. Plus, a debate over transgender rights in Congress. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. It's been more than 2 weeks since the election, and still there are 4 uncalled House races. And right now, Republicans are looking at a one-seat majority, and they're also looking at 3 potential vacancies, with Matt Gaetz resigning and 2 other members tapped for roles in the new Trump administration. Ali Vitale, of course, covers Capitol Hill for us, and she joins me now with what Speaker Johnson is facing. So right now, Ali, we have 4 uncalled House races. Who's leading those races?
Yeah, 4 uncalled House races. And you look at the balance of power right now. I mean, we knew it was going to be tight, Yamiche, but 218 for Republicans. That is, in theory, the magic number here. And then Democrats at 213. The ways those numbers are going to change depend on these 4 races. And we actually just called one of those. There used to be a 5th until like 2 hours ago. That was in Ohio. Marcy Kaptur, the Democrat, was able to keep that seat, so that lent 1 more to the Democratic column. But here, look in Alaska. This is a Democrat on defense seat. The reason you're not seeing percentages is because they're in a ranked choice voting state, and they are currently reallocating those votes because they're on to the second balloting round. And so we're going to wait to see if Mary Peltola can keep her seat. The same can be said of John Duarte in California's 13th. This was a race where, again, it was close last time. Now you've got a difference of 227 votes. Going to be close again this time. The same can be said of California's 45th district. This is an area where Michelle Steele, the Republican incumbent, is playing defense. The Democrat leads by just over 300 votes there. And then in Iowa's 1st congressional, I opened this up and I thought, oh my God, this race total hasn't changed, but for 3 votes since 2 or 3 weeks ago when I opened this up the last time. Right now, the Republican playing defense there. So effectively, if you are able to look at this, you'd have 1 more, 2 more in the Republican column, potentially 3 more in the Republican column, and then 1 more in the Dem column. I don't do very well with math, but as we back it up here on the board, if you're adding 3 more here, you end up with 221 and then 214 as the board kind of rebels against me. And so, again, you're looking at a Republican majority, but not by much, especially when you take the fact that 3 of these seats are gone now. So you stay back at 218. It's just a little bit of a messy map right now for Republicans in the majority.
Yeah, well, someone who's going to definitely be trying to do that math is also going to be House Speaker Johnson. So Republicans had a lot of trouble getting things done when they had an even larger majority in the House. I wonder now, because now they'll be controlling the presidency, the Senate, and the House, even if it is by that slim majority, is that going to make things easier?
Probably not, especially when you look at the fact that they're going to have some special elections coming up, too. So Johnson knows the majority that he's dealing with is going to be small, but he's also got many of the same kinds of unruly members who might want to exact their own agenda or put their own stamp on legislation in this Trump era. And so at the same time as you're getting rid of most likely a motion to vacate threshold at 1, that at least puts the speaker's job in a little bit less jeopardy. They're probably going to put the motion to vacate at 9 now. But at the same time, Yamiche, you're also looking at the ability, when you've got margins that are this close, any single person actually gets to be a majority maker effectively.
Yeah, and I want to ask you to come on over, because apart from the big board, which of course is incredibly important, especially as Speaker Johnson's look at this, the other thing that Speaker Johnson's having to deal with is Nancy Mace and this anti-transgender bill. So tell us the latest there.
Nancy Mace basically trying to force this issue as the first transgender member of Congress makes their way to this building. That's Sarah McBride of Delaware. And none of these rules go into effect until January. But what Mace is saying is, I'm going to push a privileged resolution on the floor that says that people who were born male are not allowed to use women's bathrooms. The speaker, for his part, basically backed that up, both in a statement yesterday, but also saying today, he says all single-sex facilities in the Capitol and House office buildings, restrooms, changing rooms, locker rooms, are reserved for individuals of that biological sex. He says it's important to note that each member office has its own private restroom, and unisex restrooms are available throughout the Capitol. Women deserve women's-only spaces. None of this is real until the rules package passes in January, so this is sort of future casting right now. But I can tell you, bathrooms at the Capitol in the immediate vicinity of the House floor, I can't actually think of any unisex stalls that are near there. And so there's a question of accessibility, a question of dignity, and a question, frankly, of why they're targeting just one member.
Well, that one member, of course, is Representative-elect Sarah McBride. She released a statement today, but so did Nancy Mace. So what are they both saying today?
Well, in Sarah McBride's statement, she said, I'm not here to fight about bathrooms. I'm here to fight for Delawareans and to bring costs down for families. Like all members, I'm going to follow the rules, she says, as outlined by Speaker Johnson, even as I disagree with them. She calls this a distraction. Her Democratic colleagues, for their part, Yamiche, are saying that this is bullying. But Mace has also released a statement, as you mentioned, where she says, at Speaker Johnson, the fight isn't over just yet. We want to ban men from women's spaces in every federal building, school, public bathroom, everywhere. So Mace is clearly not just willing to stop with the Capitol. She wants to make this a larger battle for this Congress.
Yeah, and this has been, of course, a big battle here, but also throughout the country. So definitely a place to land. Well, thanks for doing double duty at the big board at the desk. We appreciate that. Good to see you. And still to come, Dr. Oz, a former reality TV star, a Fox News host, and now more. We'll dig deeper into the political fallout as Trump fails his administration. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, Congress and in particular the Senate has a lot on its plate as President-elect Trump quickly names some polarizing figures to his cabinet. For more on all this, I'm joined by the panel, Idris Calhoun, Washington bureau chief at The Economist, Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden, and Mark Lauder, former director of the strategic communications for the Trump 2020 campaign. So thank you all of you for being here. So I want to start with you. What do you make of the fact that President-elect Trump is working the phones and sending J.D. Vance to meet with senators when it comes to trying to get Matt Gaetz across the finish line?
Well, he wants who he wants, right? Gaetz is not a sacrificial lamb, some people thought that he might be, to get the other confirmation through. The president actually wants him to get through, but I think he'll have his hands full. I think that, unlike the other appointees, there are 5 or 6 Republican senators who have already said statements suggesting that they're not going to vote for him. I think it'll be the hardest one for him, but I think the other ones will probably get through. And
there's this question of whether or not it's surprising to see President-elect Trump expend this much capital this early on. But part of me thinks, well, maybe this is a well that's never going to run dry because he's the one that's responsible for getting Republicans all this power in Washington.
Yeah, and also, it allows him to see what the landscape is. Thune is the leader. How does he play this? Who is the opposition going to be? Is it McConnell? Is it Collins? Is it Murkowski? I mean, it is also a kind of a tracer round for all the problems he's going to have to be dealing with in the future.
Yeah. And Mark, I want to read you something that our colleague Chuck Todd wrote in his column today. He writes, these moments of peak political capital are fleeting, and when they go, they go. Just ask President Joe Biden. The question is whether Trump and his GOP understand how they won. If they don't accept the premise that they won because of who they were, not rather than because of who they are, they'll see their support erode as quickly for them as it did for Biden. I wonder how you see that, especially when you think of how much political capital Republicans might be willing to spend on Matt Gaetz. But also there's the idea that Trump has defied sort of traditional history and the way that politics works. So I wonder what your view of this.
Well, I think I agree with Chuck, but I think I disagree in one area. I think fighting, whether it's the swamp, the so-called deep state, the bureaucracy, that is one of the reasons why Trump won. It may not be with the middle, who decided on immigration and economy, but for a large portion of his base, they want to see someone that's going to get in there and fight. So I think that capital has a very deep well for him to tap into. Maybe with some of the other in that more in the middle,
yeah,
it's a little thinner. But this is, to your point, this is not about 6 or 5. It's about holding the defections to 3.
Yeah, and you, of course, Mark, have worked closely with President-elect Trump. So I want to ask you, do you think he's thought really deeply about the idea of recess appointments and the consequences of asking Republican senators in particular to abdicate their responsibilities, they would say their duty to confirm his nominees?
Well, I think in some cases, especially if you're from a very deep red MAGA state and you do not necessarily want to vote for confirmation, you might welcome a recess appointment because then you don't have to have an up or down vote that would be on your record when you seek re-election.
Yeah. I wonder Megan, what do you think it'll take for the dominoes to fall when it comes to Matt Gaetz? Do you think that Senate Republicans will be willing to sort of publicly be open to this Matt Gaetz appointment, especially if maybe another person steps through, or they just say, hey, he's not qualified, I can't do this?
I think that the information about what's in that ethics report is continually going to leak out through the different sources. You saw the lawyer on TV for the past couple of days, and every day it's going to get worse and worse, and it's just going to keep mounting up. And I think eventually that the leaks are going to be too much, and President-elect Trump will probably pull the nomination so they won't have to vote on it, because I think that they realize voting, not getting him through, is more of a problem for President-elect Trump than it's just pulling back his nomination.
Is that sort of wishful thinking, though? Do you think that might happen, or do you think that it's because I think you look at President-elect Trump and how much he wants this.
I mean, does he really want this, or is he just out there saying he does because it's who he put forward? I mean, to your point, there's been 5 or 6 senators out there that have already said that they probably will not vote for him. On the Republican side, there's a bunch of House members who are also up there with opposition. So the leaks are just going to keep coming. And I think that the thing that President-elect Trump doesn't like is having someone have the spotlight more than him. And I think that this just creates more mud in the well for him. And I think that that will be problematic for the other people who are actually problematic, like a Tulsi Gabbard.
And I would say, too, remember the art of the deal. You know, the longer he keeps him up there, the more you have a bargaining chip, if this comes to pass, to say, well, maybe one of my other ones, you pull this one down, I'll be there for you on the other one.
Exactly.
Not saying that's happening, but that could happen. That's Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and it's interesting because still publicly no Republican senator has said he's voting against confirming Matt Gaetz, but there has been some public, I guess, statements when it comes to the New York Post editorial board, and I want to read that for you, Idris. It says, while most of the cabinet picks have been excellent, they say, some of them are risky but promising. Gaetz and Gabbard are dreadful. They say dreadful. We plead that he rethink them. They're distracting chaos agents who won't accomplish what Trump wants them to and will most likely backfire on his agenda. So I wonder, do you think these pleas, they resonate with President-elect Trump?
I think, the New York Post carries more weight than the New York Times for him. I think, the Journal editorial board would carry more weight with Republican senators. There's certainly a number of them who pay attention to that. So I don't think that these pleas are for naught. And I also think that to the recess appointments question, the new Senate isn't going to get seated until January 3rd. To be in recess, you have to be there for 10 days. Yeah. So what is the 10-day period that Donald Trump's going to take to break up his 100-day agenda to actually get through Matt Gaetz? I mean, it might not come until Easter. Is he really going to wait 4 months to get Matt Gaetz through? I think, one way or another, I don't see it happening.
Really, Mark, I wonder if there's this question of how much Donald Trump is willing to sort of push these senators, and which senator stands up and actually goes toe to toe with President-elect Trump. It's one thing to sort of whisper to reporters, I don't think I see a path. It's another thing to be the senator that stands up and says, I'm not voting for the person you want.
I'm not sure they'll go that far, depending on the senator and where and what state they're in. I mean, if you're, and I'm not going to ascribe these beliefs to anyone specifically, but if you're a Lisa Murkowski, if you're a Susan Collins, you've already made your positions known on a lot of Trump policy and or beliefs. If you're a Senator Mitch McConnell, who may not be running again for re-election, you don't care what it is. And so, again, each one of these senators will have to calculate their position based on where they are with their base, their election cycles, and if they think they can get something for it in the long term.
And Megan, I want to play something that Senator John Fetterman said about Mehmet Oz, who is, of course, the person who has been picked to lead the massive Medicare and Medicaid agency. Take a listen to what Senator Fetterman had to say.
We're going to have to work with these individuals, and if he's about protecting and preserving Medicaid Air and Medicare, then I don't know why that's controversial. I'm not going to have like a knee-jerk, well, no, just because he said some mean things to me in an election or whatever. We're all professionals. We got to move on that. And if he meets my criteria, then I vote for him.
If he meets my criteria, then I'll vote for him. That's somebody who faced off with him. What's your reaction?
I mean, I think that's the way the Senate is supposed to work, right? If these people are qualified and are going to do what they think they should be doing in these spots, regardless if they're Democrats or Republicans, and whether or not you're a Democrat or Republican, you should vote for them to confirm them. I think that that's when these unqualified people come into have trouble, like a Matt Gaetz or a Tulsi Gabbard, and that's where people get called up. But I think that what Senator Fetterman said is pretty honorable and the right thing to do.
Mark?
I think it's great to see. Obviously, people on both sides are going to hold their fire, do their due diligence, do their jobs. That's what the Constitution gave them the power to do.
Yeah, and do you think this is in some ways, with that going on, do you think that there's in some ways this idea to lower the bar if Democrats are willing to say, if you meet the criteria, I'll vote for you, but then if you have people that maybe like Tulsi Gabbard and others who maybe are even seen as lower bar, that might be a problem?
I think generally the president should be entitled to a lot of deference on their picks, and I think that, there's a really good argument for why Matt Gaetz doesn't meet it, but if the president wants to put Mehmet Oz in place, then he'll get Fetterman's vote. He'll also get Dave McCormick's vote, both Pennsylvania senators.
It also could be interesting because Pennsylvania is turning more red.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for all of this, and we'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but the news continues right now with Hallie Jackson.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.